It's great to welcome back to the program Democratic Congressman Ritchie Torres, representing New York's 15th congressional district in the Bronx since 2021. Congressman, it's so great to have you back, and it's a really, I think, an important time to talk to you because your district is number 2 in the country for Medicaid enrollees. 67% of your district is enrolled in Medicaid. You, I can only imagine, are worried about what the assumed cuts that are being sort of played coy with here by Doge would do to your constituents. Can you tell me, have you been hearing from people? Are your constituents aware of sort of what's at stake here?
We're in a state of panic. The Trump agenda, the budget resolution enacted by congressional Republicans, would represent a catastrophe for the country, and nowhere more so than in the Bronx. As you said, I represent the highest concentration of Medicaid recipients in the nation. 66% of my district is enrolled in Medicaid. And to provide you with some statistics, more than 72% of the children in New York 15 are covered by Medicaid. 82% of the nursing home residents are covered by Medicaid. 91% of the baby deliveries are covered by Medicaid. So it is health insurance for babies, children, and senior citizens that Republicans are intent on savagely cutting. And it's worth noting that Medicaid is no longer simply health insurance for the lowest income. It has become long-term care for the elderly and the disabled and the chronically ill. And so it's become as critical to senior citizens as Medicare. And the Republicans passed a budget resolution that would cut Medicaid by up to $880 billion, which would decimate the program, and communities like mine would be the hardest hit. And not only Medicaid, but as you know, cut education by $330 million, cut food assistance by up to $230 billion, all to fund more than $1 trillion in tax cuts for the top 1%.
I recently spoke to Senators Warren and Schiff, who think there is something to the idea that the goal of making these systems more dysfunctional is to increase the desire to see them privatized. And this is sort of a strategy as old as kind of the United States economy itself, which is the worse a system functions, the more people believe this is not working, the more open they are to ideas of, hey, maybe let's look at having Wall Street or for-profit agencies manage some of this stuff. Do you think that that's at the core potentially of what they have up their sleeves?
Well, the Reagan administration was the first to pioneer what has often been described as the starve the beast strategy. And for me, Doge is taking starve the beast to a new extreme, right? The objective of Doge is to cripple the ability of the federal government to govern. It's to set up the federal government to fail and then cite the failure as a pretext for further defunding of the government or further privatization of government core functions. I mean, that's the game that's being played. But Joe just taking it to a new extreme, the starve the beast strategy.
What can Democrats do to prevent this from happening? And I hear from people in my audience who say, you're talking to people who have great ideas, they're assessing the problem correctly, they're suggesting alternatives that are interesting, but Trump's got the White House, Republicans have the House and Senate. What can the Democratic Party do right now to prevent the worst of these ideas from becoming a reality?
Look, the reality is that Donald Trump and congressional Republicans cannot keep the government open without Democratic votes. They cannot raise the debt ceiling without Democratic votes. And so we should be using whatever leverage we have to prevent Donald Trump's decimation of the federal workforce and Donald Trump's decimation of the social safety net. There's no alternative. Like, I feel strongly that Senate Dems have to vote against the continuing resolutions put forward by Republicans because this is the only moment of leverage that we might have.
Yeah, I think the concern for me is when it really is Republicans shutting down the government, Democrats still sometimes get blamed. And then often you hear from Democrats, no, 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 you never play games with the government shutdown. And now the suggestion from some is this time it might actually be the only leverage we have, to which I would say you're right. But doesn't this only hurt the prospects of Democrats in 2026?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, it's a Republican shutdown because Republicans control the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And Republicans could have chosen to pursue a bipartisan path and negotiate a compromise that would have kept the government funded. Instead, it chose a hyperpartisan path. And so the burden falls on the Republicans as the party in power to find the votes to keep the government funded.
Yeah, I struggle to. I mean, of course, you're correct. And also, the last 12 years of following shutdowns makes me scared that the voters are going to sort of blame the wrong people. But maybe this time it's different. I don't know. If you hear a lack of confidence in my voice, it's
Yeah.
because it's gone so poorly in the past.
Well, historically, Republicans have been blamed for government shutdowns, right? Most infamously, Newt Gingrich. But look, we're in a time when we're witnessing an unprecedented assault on the social safety net, on the U.S. economy, on the federal workforce. And we cannot stand by passively and allow Elon Musk and Donald Trump to take a wrecking ball to the core functions of government because the damage that they're doing will endure long after their time in public office.
Are there clear leaders of the Democratic Party right now in your mind? Because I've asked this question of a number of different folks, and I get that at this point in time, in this point in the election cycle, there's maybe reasons to be cagey. But are there names that strike you right now? If someone said who is or who are the leaders of this party, what names come to mind, if any?
Look, we have a deep bench of talent, right? We have legislative leaders like Hakeem Jeffries, but we also have, strong governors like Wes Moore and Josh Shapiro. We're going to have a deep bench of talent that's going to reveal itself in the 2028 presidential election. So, no one, there's the Democratic Party at the moment has no single leader because we have no president. We have no Democratic nominee, right? We have no one who's going to rival the bully pulpit of a sitting president, much less someone like Donald Trump, who knows how to dominate the airwaves. So I don't worry about that. I think we have a deep bench of talent, and it's going to reveal itself over time.
I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with tariffs and the stock market up, down, mostly down, and some of the other concerning economic indicators that we are seeing. Without betraying any confidences, right? Behind the scenes, to the extent that you're talking to your Republican colleagues, do they believe this is a little pain to get to the pot at the end of the rainbow? Or are they concerned about what they're seeing in terms of this erratic economic policy from the White House?
It varies, but I sense to the extent there are normal Republicans, I sense real concern and anxiety about the actions of Donald Trump. But again, the Republicans are no longer a normal political party. It's become a cult of personality around Donald Trump. And the average congressional Republican lives in fear of Donald Trump and will never cross him, will never critique him. What I found striking is when Donald Trump was claiming the authority to defund whatever program he wishes, whenever he wishes, for whatever reason he wishes, when he
Yeah.
was attacking the spending power of Congress. You had the Republican chair of the Appropriations Committee seeming to suggest that maybe the president does have the power to impound funds. Like it was just remarkable to see the Appropriations chair ceding his own authority to an overreaching executive.
One of the things that's notable is that every principle that this Republican Party has claimed to hold holy over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that I've been sort of following American politics, it goes out the window when it's inconvenient, completely out the window. Concept of conservative, smallest possible government goes completely out the window when all of a sudden they decide, actually, we have 10, 20, 30 things that we want government to get involved in newly that it hasn't been involved in before. Given this complete lack of real principles, how do you negotiate with folks where you don't really even know what they will or won't support at any given time? Are these people you can even work with, I guess is the question.
I mean, we have no choice in some cases, but you're right. The overarching principle of the Republican Party is Donald Trump. The unquestioning loyalty to Donald Trump seems to trump everything else. And so, we have trouble negotiating with a party that is no longer functioning as a political party. It's become a religion in the service of Donald Trump. And Republicans are willing to discard conservative principles and frankly lie. I mean, Republicans pass a resolution, budget resolution that cuts up to $880 billion from Medicaid. And then they lie about it. They pretend, oh, it will have no impact on Medicaid, or it's only about fraud, waste, and abuse, which is an outright lie.
One of the areas where I think they're just crushing us, and this is what I hear from so many in my audience, is that it's not feeling very cool to be on the political left right now. And one of the things we learned during the last 3 months of the presidential campaign was that this whole environment that MAGA has built, where the influencers are hanging out by the pool at Mar-a-Lago, and they're hanging out on Nelk Boys and all of the podcasts. They've really created an environment that's not just media ecosystem, but there's a sort of vibe there that seems cooler to be a part of, even if the policies are a disaster, even if they don't know or care what the policies are. And I'm not really hearing anything from anybody I'm talking to about what the left can or should be doing right now to try to take back some of the cultural cachet that the right successfully weaponized to win everything in November. What do you think should be done?
Look, I feel like we have to recognize, and we're beginning to recognize, that we're in a brave new world of alternative media. And if we have confidence in our message as Democrats, we have to be willing to take that message to every quarter of the alternative media ecosystem. We could no longer afford to cede that to the political right in America. And that to me was one of the great strategic miscalculations that the Harris campaign made in the 2024 election. We have to be radically accessible and available to alternative media outlets.
And I'm guessing that that also means you don't just start calling about interviews in October of an election year, but we're really trying to kind of build a movement and an ecosystem here. But there seems to be, I mean, you would know more. My sense from the outside has been that there is such risk aversion that a lot of uncontrolled interviews, the sort of that Trump did, right? 3 hours with the Nelk boys or Rogan or whatever, that the risk aversion really scares off a lot of the staffers of Democratic elected officials. Do you see that?
Most elected officials are risk averse. And keep in mind that, the skills of an elected official in the world of alternative media is quite different from the skills the one historically needed to succeed as an elected official. So, I have colleagues who are struggling to adapt to a new environment, who are resistant to change. But the results of the 2024 election is forcing a painful reckoning. And you do see colleagues who are embracing alternative media, sometimes comically, but you see the effort unfolding.
To go back briefly to the economic stuff, because we kind of got off of that, I've been kind of wondering what's the off ramp here, assuming that the stock market continues doing what it's doing and that someone gets to the White House and says, listen, the whole a little pain to get to the promised land, it's not working, it's not happening, it's a real problem. What's the 180 that allows Trump to save face here while stopping the hemorrhaging that we are seeing? Is it claiming he got everything he wants so he can end the tariffs? Or what do your colleagues on the Republican side, if they're sharing with you, see as the way out of this that will fit into Trump's personality?
I mean, it's not clear to me there is an off ramp because this is not one issue among many, right? This is the core issue on which he ran. Like he ran on tariffs. He ran on effectuating a manufacturing revival in the deindustrialized Midwest. And so do I think he's going to renege? I mean, he believes it. He's been consistent on the issue. I feel like his policies are deeply destructive and it's creating massive uncertainty in the economy that's going to lead to more inflation and less economic growth. But he's clinging, and people are, by the way, catching on to his game. Like he keeps crying wolf, and I think Mexico and Canada realize that he's just going to keep playing this game of delaying and delaying the tariffs. But the mere threat of the tariffs, the uncertainty that it creates, is doing enormous damage to the U.S. economy.
You know, last thing I want to mention, sometimes I understand all of the economics of what's going on and it's a disaster, right? You understand it, I understand it. And then sometimes in the back of my head, I get this thought, could Trump know what he's doing? Like, is it possible that this is all going to work out and there is some kind of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Does that ever occur to you?
Look, there's no president in history that has had more grandiose, more delusions of grandeur than Donald Trump. I mean, he once said that he was the best president for African Americans, including even better than Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And so he has a grandiose view of himself as a negotiator. You know, he seems to think that he can leverage tariffs to negotiate the best outcomes for the United States, but it's not even clear what he's seeking. Like, I get China and Mexico genuinely have a role in the fentanyl crisis, right? 97% of fentanyl precursors are manufactured in China, and those precursors are sent to Mexico where they're synthesized and then smuggled into the United States. So that part I get at some level. I disagree with the tariffs, but I get the logic. What exactly does he want from Canada?
Right.
Like, Canada has no role. There's no border security crisis with Canada. There's no fentanyl crisis in relation to Canada. So it's not even clear what he's seeking. He's just picking a gratuitous fight with one of our closest allies with no end game.
It doesn't make any sense as near as I can tell. Congressman Ritchie Torres from New York's 15th congressional district. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.